And so, after years of development and government review, this agency today proudly announces its approval of this major new drug. By our estimates, this drug will save over 8,000 lives per year.
If the government approves a drug that will start saving lives tomorrow, then how many people died yesterday waiting for the government to act? Shouldn't we know the answer to that before we start applauding?
We're cautious. FDA's mindset, in a very large sense, has been shaped by the thalidomide tragedy. And while that certainly was a deadly tragedy, it was one that was prevented in this country not by the new omnipotent FDA, but by the old FDA, the FDA pre-1962, before it had its powers greatly expanded. In a sense, thalidomide, having been an FDA success story, has now become FDA's excuse for one failure after another.
Give us some examples. I know you brought the cardio pump. Why don't you show us that and tell us about it?
That's a good thing to start with. This is a 1.5-pound device, which in over a dozen countries, ranging from Germany to Austria to France to Chile to Japan and China, saves lives. In this country, it's illegal.
And perhaps some policy changes.
Congressman Barton is the new chairman of a subcommittee overseeing the FDA, and he says he might hold hearings into its drug approval process. At the same time, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a pro-business organization, announced an anti-FDA media campaign.
And how many people died yesterday waiting for the government to act?
Essentially, we propose that FDA's veto power be changed to one of what we call certification.
Meanwhile, the Washington Legal Foundation is continuing its fight against what it calls overregulation. And the drug industry says much of the FDA's job could be farmed out.
A lot of the work we think can be done better and more quickly and probably less expensively outside of government.
Senator Connie Mack also wants to see changes. He says seeing his brother Michael die from skin cancer was a lesson.
It makes no sense for the government to be saying to people, oh, we're not going to let you experiment with this because it might kill you. I mean, Michael was struggling for his life.
Consumer advocate Dr. Sidney Wolf says the problem is the FDA's capabilities have been too limited.
Instead of pretending the FDA isn't doing a good job and trying to privatize it in the hands of people that are going to damage the public, strengthen the FDA.
The FDA refuses to comment on possible reforms and contends it approved a large number of drugs in record time in 1994. Jeff Levine, CNN, reporting.
It is 17 minutes after the hour. Since the Republicans took over Congress, you've heard a lot about a balanced budget amendment and the welfare reform, but not so much about consumer issues. Our consumer correspondent, Hattie Kaufman, is here in the studio for once with a preview of the issues that are sure to produce a nasty confrontation on Capitol Hill.
That's right. Good morning, Paula. Thanks. What does a Republican Congress mean for the average consumer? Well, as with many things in Washington these days, that depends on whom you're listening to. But one thing is for sure, the battle over regulation will be red hot.
I got into politics because I was a small businessman inundated by these regulations. So as far as I'm concerned, regulatory reform is right up there with balanced budget amendment to the Constitution.
Representative Tom DeLay, the new Republican whip, is leading the fight to start rolling back federal regulation of business. He feels decades of Democratic control have led to a regulation mania that stifles business and forces consumers to pay more for goods and services.
The pendulum has gone so far to the left that we're doing outrageous things. I mean, we are claiming that children's teeth are hazardous waste, and because of that, dentists have to treat them in a special way that drives up the cost of the dentist office.
Another area of regulation mania, according to the Republicans, is the environment. Terrence Scanlon, the head of the Consumer Product Safety Commission during the Reagan years, says we can expect to see the spotted owl making headlines again.
Things like the Endangered Species Act, which without question hurts our national economy, hurts job creation, all for a spotted owl. We're losing our competitiveness as a result of the amount of regulation that we have in the country.
DeLay has proposed the Regulatory Transition Act, which would force the Clinton administration to put a moratorium on all new regulation until the end of June. That would give Congress a chance to review what's already on the books and decide what's worth keeping.
Imagine, that's like saying in the area of crime in the streets, let's put a moratorium on the police policing the streets until we figure out whether the police are behaving themselves.
Ralph Nader believes that no matter how much the Republicans say it's the consumer they're looking out for, it's really big business they want to help.
We have federal cops on the corporate beat. They're supposed to be protecting people who have pensions, small investors, people who are exposed to hazards in the workplace, marketplace, and environment. This is law and order for corporations. This is exactly what the Republicans want to destroy.
Democratic Representative Joseph Kennedy feels you can sum up the Republican philosophy in a nutshell.
That's it. Cut all the regulations, hand the reins over to big business, and let them run themselves. I think if we do that, there are going to be a lot of not just poor people, but ordinary working folks in America, blue-collar citizens in America, who are going to end up feeling very abused by the powerful interests of this country.
Conservative think tanks have joined the battle, saying concerns for public safety have been taken to absurd extremes. This anti-regulation commercial, which takes the Food and Drug Administration to task for delays in approving drugs, was produced by the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
If the government approves a drug that will start saving lives tomorrow, then how many people died yesterday waiting for the government to act? Shouldn't we know the answer to that before we start applauding?
How far will it go? Do you see the Clean Air Act being repealed?
Well, I introduced a bill to repeal the Clean Air Act. I don't think we'll be able to repeal the Clean Air Act this year, or maybe not even next year, but we're starting the dialogue.
Kennedy hopes the Republicans will stick to that kind of position, a kind he thinks Americans will find too extreme.
If that really is their agenda, I think that Bill Clinton will get reelected as president, and I think we'll have a chance of resurrecting a pro-consumer agenda here in the Congress.
This fight has constitutional ramifications as well. The president may well argue that Congress has no right to restrict the regulations put out by agencies of the executive branch. Separation of powers.
The Republicans, though, certainly aren't talking about doing away with all regulation.
You might think so when you go and interview some of them, but no, actually, they are pushing something called cost-benefit analysis, which means that for every regulation that is passed, you should weigh that, the risks that they're trying to address, with the cost of enforcing that regulation. For instance, say a company is required to buy helmets for every worker. Is the risk really that great that every worker is going to be hurt, or is this, is this just too much of a cost for that business to bear? And they say the consumer is going to benefit because if businesses don't have to spend all this money on meeting all these regulations, then theoretically prices go down.
Theoretically.
It's the trickle-down theory.
All right, Hetty Kaufman, thanks so much. It is just...
Washington, does this country really need the Food and Drug Administration? Some Republicans in Congress want to trim government by eliminating it. What's at stake here? We asked NBC's Robert Hager to take a look.
We need to tailor a system.
Why is this man, FDA Chief Dr. David Kessler, being mocked in an ad by a look-alike actor playing a pompous bureaucrat?
This agency today proudly announces its approval of this major new drug.
Answer, because the conservative group which paid for the ad says the FDA takes way too long to issue such approvals.
How many people died yesterday waiting for the government to act?
With the Republican takeover of Congress, a half-dozen conservative groups are demanding the FDA be shut down or its authority reined in. They have an ally in House Speaker Newt Gingrich.
I think the Food and Drug Administration is killing American jobs and slowing down the introduction of new jobs, of new drugs, and is in fact harmful to American health. That's my personal belief.
Among contributors to the groups opposing FDA are Burroughs Wellcome, Glaxo, Johnson & Johnson, Searle, drug companies the agency regulates.
There are companies and individuals that see dollar signs here. If they can weaken the FDA or abolish it, it means a ticket to more profit.
The companies deny that. Critics accuse FDA of stifling drug companies, taking an average 19 months to approve a new drug, delaying cures or forcing sick Americans to turn to foreign countries for drugs. Gingrich likes to show interviewers a pump for treating heart failure.
This was invented in Denmark. This increases by 54% the number of people with CPR who get to the hospital and have a chance to recover. It is illegal in the United States.
It's true, the U.S. takes longer to approve new devices and drugs than many other countries. But officials here say last year they did manage to cut the time for drugs by 5 months, and they warn there's peril in moving too fast. Example, clomitassin, an anti-inflammatory approved in France, but after 130 cases of hepatitis and 9 deaths, ordered off the market. And the best-known example, the tranquilizer thalidomide. It caused 10,000 deformed babies in Western Europe in the early 1960s, but a cautious FDA kept it out of the American market. As for the pump Gingrich talks about, U.S. researchers say studies have failed to show that it's any more effective than CPR. Meantime, FDA's defenders say the U.S. pharmaceutical industry is hardly suffering, still recognized as the world leader, and that if the agency that regulates it isn't broken, it shouldn't be fixed. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
So with all that...
Today, the Republicans in Congress had a tough message for the head of the Food and Drug Administration. Hurry up. Remember, it's the FDA that must approve a drug before you can buy it. What's in dispute is whether the organization is thorough or just plain slow. Here's ABC's George Strait.
Republican congressmen charged it can take up to 8 years to get a drug or medical device approved in this country, more than twice as long as Canada. But the FDA commissioner said the agency has no room for error, and the public expects it to be cautious.
You got to get it right, and you got to get it right the first time. But 8 years for a petition, I think the caution is in order.
Representatives of the pharmaceutical industry admit that caution can cost them profits, but they say the public is the real loser. Conservative groups have paid for ads shown across the country which dramatize the announcement of a new drug approval in order to underscore what they say are the consequences of FDA delay.
If the government approves a drug that will start saving lives tomorrow, then how many people died yesterday waiting for the government to act?
Also, conservative Republicans have made people available to the news media who claim the FDA acts too slowly.
I'm going to color them in. Okay, color them in.
2-year-old Bonnie Sklar has diabetes. To help control it, her mother has to draw her blood 8 times a day. Her blood could be checked with a non-invasive infrared device, but its approval has been on hold for 15 months.
I think that the FDA is a big bureaucratic mess that doesn't get anything done.
The FDA bristles at this criticism and says 3 years ago, the median time to approve a drug was 26 months. Now it's 19 months. For medical devices, approval time is down from 6 to 3 months.
We are particularly proud to have accomplished these results without lowering FDA's traditionally high standards.
The commissioner is considering a number of new proposals to make the approval process even faster. The proposals come as a number of congressional committees plan to cut the agency's budget and dramatically reduce its power. George Strait, ABC News, Washington.